Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily summary of military operations from the Ukrainian front. Well, yesterday Zelensky met with Rutte, the head of NATO, with Starmer and Macron. They all expressed their support for Ukraine. They say that negotiations are still ongoing about Tomahawks. They want to pressure Trump to provide these missiles to Ukraine. But Putin has already stated what the response will be. And as Peskov said today, it's not even about Tomahawks, but about any strikes deep into Russia. The response will be, as Putin said, stunning. We'll see, although I hope, of course, it doesn't come to that. Well, the fighting on the front continues, and we continue to study the situation. So friends, the Russian army made a lot of progress in the last 24 hours, and the progress was very good. To be clear, 3 settlements and more than 50 square kilometers of territory were taken under control. Well, let's get straight to what happened without further ado. We will start today from the north and gradually move south. So, in the Sumy region, everything is stable. Neither the Russian army nor the Ukrainian armed forces have made any advances, so we'll start with the Kharkiv region. Here, the guys advanced 2 kilometers and 200 meters and took control of the village of Balagovka. Everything here is following the trajectory that we discussed at the beginning of October. That is, an approach to Dnipropetrovsk from 2 sides, from Otradnoye and Balagovka, and then the closure of this entire section. The immediate prospect will be the closure of these pockets between Balagovka and Stroyevka, and between Balagovka and Otradnoye. The area of advancement here was just over 3 square kilometers. Let's move on Kupiansk. The Russian army made no progress here, but footage of a failed attack by the Ukrainian armed forces appeared. Remember, I told you that the UAF soldiers tried to break through in 2 armored personnel carriers to unblock their trapped and surrounded garrison in the center of Kupiansk. Well, they were burned here. The footage is already on the internet. As a result, instead of a D-blockade, they lost another dozen soldiers killed. However, some of them scattered into the forest plantations, so the cartographers here have drawn something I don't know what to call it. Well, because, there is footage. 2 armored personnel carriers are driving, Russian drones set them on fire. Some of the UAF managed to scatter in different directions, and so what? Should they draw control for them here because of this? Well, that's debatable. However the cartographer draws it, that's how it is. We'll see what happens here in the coming days. Let's move on. Progress for the Russian army is observed in the Lyman direction. Yesterday I told you that the Russian army is now trying to break through to Lyman from the north, and fighting is taking place on the outskirts of the village of Stavki. That is, for the last line of defense protecting the city from the north. Because after Stavki, that's it, a direct route to Lyman from the north. But the first attempt was a failure. They entered the village but could not gain a foothold. However, there is also success. Here they leveled the front line on a section more than 3 kilometers wide. Plus, from the east, the guys are also trying to advance to start putting pressure on Stavki from the eastern side. In general, things are bad for the Ukrainian armed forces near Lyman, and they are especially bad on the eastern side. There, Russian soldiers made a dash of 4 kilometers and reached the city. And they didn't just reach it, they entered Lyman. The advance from the north is good. But look what we have here from the east. And here there's a 4-kilometer dash and an exit to the village of Masliakovka. And it's important to understand here that the village of Masliakovka, although it's called a village, is not some separate settlement. It's part of Lyman. And moreover, I have data that Russian troops not only reached Lyman, but Russian soldiers have already entered and established themselves in Lyman itself, namely on Vishnevaya and Partizanskaya streets. But in fact, this is something incredible. I expected the start of the battle for Lyman in January-February. I talked about this in one of the episodes. And what do we have now? It's still October, and Russian troops have already entered Lyman. But of course, let me make a reservation. Not everything is stable here yet. It is necessary to expand the section, at least clear everything up to the railway and do it like this. But still, the very fact that the UAF is sagging so much here, that Russian soldiers were able to enter the city already says a lot. Yesterday, in the Ukrainian segment of the internet, there was a real panic about the breakthrough of Russian troops into Lyman. Just a couple of days ago, they were saying that in the near future, Russian troops would break into Lyman, and now only 2 to 3 days pass, and it happened. It seems that the UAF really has a big problem with personnel. If they manage to push through Stavki and reach Lyman from the north, the city will be in trouble instantly. In short, we are observing. Friends, a small request before we continue. If you liked this video, support the channel with a subscription, a like, and write in the comments where you are watching us from and what you think about what has been described. And we continue. And let's move on to the Siversk section. There was also progress there. What happened? And here there is an advance of more than 3 kilometers and a captured village. The soldiers broke through and took control of Dnipropetrovsk. This is very, very important. I'll explain why. It's not just about the captured village, which is also, of course, important, but also about the fact that now from the current positions to the main supply artery is less than 3 kilometers. And it is through this road that the delivery of ammunition, rotation, and so on is carried out. Well, it was carried out. How they will do it now, I don't know. Because, well, 4 kilometers in the conditions of the current war, the war of drones, is a ridiculous distance. Everything here will be taken out and hit in a flash. And plus, you need to understand that with the capture of Dnipropetrovsk, of course, the soldiers will not sit still, but will move on in the direction of Platonovka. And that means the distance to the road will inevitably shrink every day. Yes, the UAF has another road by which they supply Siversk. It is through Sviato-Pokrovskoye. Well, and it is only 3.5 kilometers from the current Russian positions. In general, all logistical routes to Siversk are already under Russian fire control. And that means the city is in an operational encirclement. Let's move on. There are no changes in the Konstantinivka and Dnipropetrovsk directions, but there was good progress in the Mirnogradsky direction. Here the soldiers got very close to the eastern outskirts of the city. The village of Promin, old name Luch, was also taken under control. Perhaps this name will be returned. Plus, from the side of Novogrodovka, they advanced along the railway for 1 kilometer. Well, and the immediate goal here is not even to reach the southern outskirts of Mirnograd, but rather to take the village of Sukhoy Yar. Everything is heading towards this, since the village is now blocked from 3 sides, from the west, east, and south. Well, and it is unlikely that the UAF will be able to hold their positions here for long. And plus, they also advanced 500 meters from the north. Here they advanced and reached Mukhamadyeva Street. But things are even worse for the UAF in Pokrovsk. Due to the fact that the logistical approaches to the city are completely controlled by Russian forces, they have begun to have serious setbacks already inside the city. Let's go through them in order. Over the past day, they managed to cross the railway tracks from the side of the railway station and enter the northern part of the city, reaching Schmidt Street. Plus, from the side of Prokofiev Street, they reached the central street. Plus, they advanced 400 meters along Nikolai Boyko Street, reaching the outskirts of the Gornyak district. Well, and the most significant advance was in the eastern part of the city. The advance in the residential area was over 1 kilometer. The streets of Suvorov, Gornyak, Geopolitical, and Solomia Krushelnitska were taken under full control. As you can see, the setback is quite significant, especially if we keep in mind that this is a city. This is an advance through the residential area of the city. And every day, the situation for the UAF will only get worse, that's a fact. There is a chance that Russian troops will finish off the city by the end of the autumn military campaign, that is, by the end of November. Well, at least if the pace of advance in the city remains the same as it is now. Then, of course, by the end of November, the city will be under full Russian control. In the Ukrainian internet network, there is also panic about Pokrovsk. Here is what they write. Pokrovsk. The situation is more than critical. Hundreds of Russian servicemen are firing at our soldiers inside the city. Report officers of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. More than 250 Russian soldiers are already in Pokrovsk, Krasnoarmysk, and are firing small arms at Ukrainian positions, including drone operators, reports UP, citing servicemen of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Logistics are completely under the control of Russian troops. Ukrainian soldiers have to walk 10 to 15 kilometers to their positions. The Russian armed forces have created several strongholds in and around the city itself, from where they continue their offensive, in the railway area between Pokrovsk and Grishino, and also along the Dachanskoye Novopavlovka-Gnatovka line. Ukrainian media quote their military as saying, "The infantry is effectively cut off from command. We hear them on the radio. They are asking for water to be dropped. People have been holding their positions for 2.5 to 3 months. This is a very long time for our brigade, as we have always tried to conduct rotations. In Pokrovsk itself, as far as I know, there are about 250 Russians, but I think there are actually more. Fighting is going on in almost every street. We have 200, sometimes 300 clashes daily," said one of the Ukrainian commanders. Let's move on. There were very good advances in the Dnipropetrovsk region, both in the Novopavlovsk and Veliko-Mikhailivka directions. In the Novopavlovsk direction, they advanced 2.5 kilometers along the border. Plus, they expanded the zone of control in the Filia area. Here, they occupied a small forest area. And in the Veliko-Mikhailivka, or rather even the Pokrovsk direction, they cleared the pocket between Oleksivka and Verbove. The advance here was almost 3 kilometers. Plus, from Verbove, they began to move a little towards Vishneva and also occupied the village of Pershotravneva, or the Russian name Pervomaiskoye. Moreover, the soldiers showed objective control footage with flags from the village. That is, the village is fully controlled by the Russian army, and in general, the advance here, if you measure it, was almost 8 kilometers. And plus, as you can see, they also cleared a solid section of territory, both in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions. For understanding, just here, in this section, Russian troops took about 20 square kilometers. In total, as I said at the very beginning of the broadcast, more than 50 square kilometers came under control. 52.6 square kilometers to be precise, and plus 3 settlements. The village of Balagovka in the Kharkiv region, the village of Promin in the Donetsk region, and the village of Pervomaiskoye in the Dnipropetrovsk region. A very, very eventful day in terms of advances. But this is not the end. Just this morning, reports began to appear that Russian soldiers managed to cross the Yancha River in another place and were able to enter the southern outskirts of the village of Egorovka. So perhaps this village will soon come under Russian control. That's all I have on the front for now. Now let's see what is happening in our political arena. Vladimir Putin also made an important statement. The response will be stunning. In the last telephone conversation with Trump, both the meeting itself and the place of its holding were proposed by the American side. Russia supports dialogue. Dialogue is always better than some kind of confrontation, than some kind of disputes, or especially war. The new sanctions are serious, but will not significantly affect our economic well-being. No self-respecting country and no self-respecting people ever decides anything under pressure. If the amount of our oil and oil products on the world market decreases sharply, then prices will rise. And my American colleague and I also talked about this. We need to invest in traditional energy, in traditional types of energy. If weapons like the Tomahawk are used to strike Russian territory, the response will be very serious, if not to say, stunning, said Vladimir Putin. Berlin will take 11,000 employees of American military bases in Germany on its payroll. Germany decided on unscheduled salary payments as a result of the budget crisis and the ongoing budget freeze. The shutdown in the United States, which began on October 1, 2025, and has been going on for more than 3 weeks. This measure affects employees of American military bases, mainly civilians, among whom the vast majority are German and other local employees working in Rhineland-Palatinate, Bavaria, Hesse, and other federal states. The initiative was a response to requests from the Verdi trade unions and appeals from local politicians, such as Alexander Schweitzer from Rhineland-Palatinate, where about 6,300 such employees work. The state is allocating about $50 million for payments to guarantee the timely receipt of October salaries until the budget conflict in the United States is resolved. It is expected that all expenses incurred after the resumption of the work of the American government will be reimbursed to Germany by the United States. In past years, during similar shutdowns, the salaries of German employees of American bases were paid with the approval of the American side, but this time the US permission was not received, which contradicts German labor law. The German government interprets its initiative as a gesture of solidarity with the US armed forces and their civilian employees. Berlin will prepare an unscheduled budget to guarantee the timely payment of salaries for October. A representative of the German Ministry of Finance told the AFP agency in Berlin. Federal employees of the United States are lining up in long queues for free food, writes CNN. The US government shutdown, now in its third week, has resulted in about 1.4 million civil servants being sent on unpaid leave or continuing to work without pay. Now federal employees are lining up in hours-long queues at food banks to get free food. We are talking about canned goods and dry rations. The Capital Area Food Bank held an event on Tuesday in Landover, Maryland, feeding more than 370 families. This is twice as many as expected. To receive food, federal employees had to show an identity card. I can't believe I'm here. I always thought that working for the government or, say, at the federal level was a guarantee of security, but it's not, said Social Security Administration employee Rolanda Williams. Earlier, the opinion of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, was cited that the shutdown would have catastrophic consequences for the army. China humiliated Germany. No one in the PRC wants to meet with German politicians. It sounds like a joke, but German Foreign Minister Wadefull is cancelling his trip to China because no one wants to meet with him. Earlier, Western media reported that a group of high-ranking EU officials would travel to China next week for urgent talks. The Guardian notes that the main goal of the visit will be an attempt to save the European automotive industry. The cancellation of the German foreign minister's visit to China is a diplomatic catastrophe, states the German Die Welt. The newspaper reminds, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has been in office for 6 months but has not yet visited the PRC for talks. He was supposed to meet with Xi Jinping next week, but the Chinese leader did not find the time. Germany is becoming a third-world country before the eyes of the whole world, with which one does not have to be ceremonious. And indeed, it is now a colonial country that has its own master, the USA. And in the PRC, apparently, they just don't want to waste time on empty politicians. That's all for today, my friends. The situation is changing every hour, and we'll keep tracking every move, every breakthrough, every decision on the battlefield and beyond. Stay alert, stay informed, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what do you think will happen next? Thank you for being here with me. This is Ruslan Baylov, and you've been watching the Daily Frontline Report. Take care and see you in the next update.